My sister tried to steal $50,000 with fake loan papers in my parents' name. At dinner, I put the evidence on the table and watched her world collapse. I was video calling my brother Dorian to discuss coming home for Easter break when he said something that made my blood run cold. Our sister Serafina had gotten into a heated argument with our parents over dropping out of nursing school. When Dad threatened to cut her off, she blurted out that, unlike me, she wasn't disguising her homosexuality. She showed them photographs from my private Instagram and informed them that I had been recruiting our youngest sister Celeste into the lifestyle. She told them I had been mocking their beliefs behind their backs, and she had tried to keep them from discovering who their daughter truly was. Mom cried while Dad shut himself in his office, and Serafina spent the next hour soothing her and presenting herself as the nice daughter. I drove home and went directly to Dorian's house. Celeste was also there, crying because Serafina had told Mom she discovered lesbian content on Celeste's phone, implying that I had corrupted her as well. My brother informed me that Serafina was already working to obtain power of attorney over our grandmother's estate by convincing everyone that I could no longer be trusted with family matters. We discovered Serafina had been doing this for years. For example, she blamed Celeste for being pregnant in high school when Serafina actually needed abortion funds, and she claimed Dorian stole from the church fundraiser when Serafina took the money for spring vacation. Then Dorian showed me Serafina's Instagram, which proved she'd been lying about nursing school for the entire semester, posting images in scrubs she never wore to clinicals that didn't exist, all while our parents paid $30,000 in tuition for classes she wasn't taking. Celeste discovered Serafina's Venmo history, which revealed that she had spent the tuition on concerts and Miami trips while emailing our parents phony grade reports she had created in Photoshop. Dorian's girlfriend, who worked at the registrar's office, revealed Serafina was expelled for paying someone to take her anatomy exam 2 months ago, rather than willingly dropping out as she had stated. We discovered emails in which Serafina attempted to obtain loans using our parents' details without their knowledge, and she was already authorized for $50,000, which would be posted next week. Serafina had been bragging to people about breaking our connection with our parents, calling me a self-righteous person who deserved to be shunned, and threatening to make sure I never saw the inheritance money. She had really looked into whether sexual orientation could be used to dispute wills in our state, and she was unhappy to learn that it could not. We learned she had been intercepting mail to hide credit card statements, revealing that she had used Mom's emergency card to make hundreds of dollars in purchases at designer boutiques. We discovered falsified checks from Dad's company account, stolen credit card bills, and evidence that Serafina had been selling our deceased grandfather's possessions on Marketplace while telling our parents she was handling his inheritance. She had made $20,000 by selling his watch collection and war artifacts, which were intended to stay in the family forever. My brother discovered text messages in which Serafina was negotiating the sale of Grandma's jewels while she was still alive in hospice, promising bidders that the pieces would be available shortly. We gathered everything into a 3-inch thick folder, revealing 3 years of systematic falsehoods and fraud. Serafina had been texting the family group chat about praying for my soul and suggesting conversion treatment programs, including links to camps that used electroshock therapy with remarks about extreme situations requiring extreme measures. She had persuaded our parents to invite their pastor and his wife to Sunday dinner for spiritual support, knowing that it would be even more humiliating for me. Sunday dinner arrived, with the pastor and his wife seated next to our parents, everyone staring at me as if I had an illness, and Serafina wearing a cross necklace I'd never seen before. Mom made me wait on the porch for 5 minutes before allowing me to enter what she now termed God's dwelling. Serafina had printed Bible verses about homosexuality and placed them in my seat, highlighted in pink. Mom began her speech by saying how sad she was, and how I had ruined their name at church and in the neighborhood, while the pastor interjected scripture references between her sentences. Serafina kept interjecting about trying to guide me, even alleging she'd caught me attempting to convert Celeste, which caused Celeste to clutch my hand under the table so tightly her nails pierced into my palm. Dad refused to look at me, while Mom talked about bringing shame to our family name and destroying everything they'd built. The pastor began praying over me without asking, placing his hand on my head as Serafina grinned behind her prayer hands. Mom was about to kick me out or demand conversion treatment, but I stood up, the folder heavy in my hands, and placed it on the table with a thud that caused the water glasses to shake. Serafina's sneer faltered briefly before returning, and she began to say something about honoring prayer time. Before anyone says another word about my soul or my choices, you need to know the truth about Serafina. The pastor's wife gasped at my interruption, but I continued, my palm on the folder's cover. Everything she's told you is a lie, starting with nursing school. Serafina paled as I began to open the folder, and Mom warned me, but I looked directly at Serafina. Should we start with the teen pregnancy, or the forged checks? Serafina's face became absolutely white as I removed the first paper from the folder. My fingers discovered the official letter from the college registrar, which I held up so that everyone could see the school's letterhead. The paper rustled softly in the suddenly quiet dining room. Mom stretched across the table for it. Dad's jaw tightened, and the pastor's hand halted midway through his prayer gesture. I handed the letter to Mom and watched her eyes glide over the phrases that confirmed Serafina's expulsion 2 months earlier for paying another student to take her anatomy exam. Serafina moved forward, attempting to take the paper from Mom's hands. Her chair scratched against the floor when she stood up too quickly. The pastor's wife shifted in her seat and gazed at her husband with startled eyes. Serafina's voice became high and urgent as she claimed the letter was forged and that I was attempting to destroy our family because I was upset over being called out. Her hands shook as she continued to grasp for the paper, but Mom took it away. I remained calm and took the next stack of papers from the folder. These were printouts from Serafina's Instagram account, showing her in scrubs she purchased online but never wore to the non-existent clinical rotations. Each photo included a timestamp, indicating that she submitted it during the class hours she was meant to be attending. Dad scooped up the papers, his hands trembling slightly. His reading glasses reflected the dining room light as he examined each image. Serafina's voice grew louder as she asserted that someone had stolen her account and posted phony photos. She kept gazing between Mom and Dad, as if she was trying to decide who to convince first. Celeste cleared her throat, and everyone turned to see her. Her voice was quiet but steady as she informed everyone about the pregnancy scare in high school, which Serafina blamed on her. She described how Serafina needed money for an abortion, but blamed Celeste when their parents discovered the pregnancy test. Mom's face fell as she gazed back and forth between her daughters. Serafina quickly pointed at Celeste and branded her a liar. She claimed that I had been manipulating Celeste and feeding her lies in order to turn the family against her. Celeste's hand found mine beneath the table again and gripped hard. I dug deeper into the folder and pulled out the Venmo transaction history that we had printed. The records revealed that $30,000 earmarked for tuition had been spent on Miami excursions, concert tickets, and expensive clothing in just one semester. Each transaction included descriptors such as Spring Break Miami and Coachella tickets, as well as the dates Mom and Dad wrote tuition checks. The pastor cleared his throat and advised we treat this as a private family problem. I kept going and spread out more papers on the table. Dad finally looked Serafina in the eyes and inquired as to whether she had been attending nursing school this semester. His voice was calm, yet there was something frightening about it that made everyone stand still. Serafina's eyes welled up with tears, which appeared to appear on order. She clasped her palms to her face and stated that everyone was ganging up on her. She tried to get closer to Mom for comfort, but Mom remained transfixed in her chair, staring at the evidence on our Sunday dinner table. Dorian took out his phone and turned the screen toward Dad. The screenshots depicted Serafina's chats to her friends in which she boasted of destroying me. She'd called me terrible names and rejoiced that I'd been kicked out and abandoned. She had actually stated that she couldn't wait to see me homeless while she received the entire fortune. The pastor's wife leaned in and whispered to her husband that she needed to leave. He shook his head slightly, telling her they should remain as witnesses. I took a big breath and looked around the table. I informed them I was gay and not ashamed of who I was. I explained that using my identity as a weapon would not make Serafina's crimes disappear. Except for Serafina's murmuring that I was attempting to divert attention away from my perversion, the room fell silent. She continued repeating that term, as if it would distract everyone from the evidence in front of them. I reached for the most damaging documents in the folder. The counterfeit checks from Dad's company account appeared one by one. Each check demonstrated Serafina's varying degrees of success in copying his signature. Some were clearly forgeries, but others were near enough that the bank cashed them. Dad's countenance changed from perplexed to enraged when he recognized transaction amounts he had never authorized. He instantly grabbed out his phone and began contacting the bank's fraud department number, which he appeared to know by memory. His voice was aggressive as he informed them that he needed to report many instances of check fraud on his business account. Serafina began to retreat toward the dining room entrance, but Dorian stood up and barred her route. Mom eventually found her voice and asked Serafina how she could do this to her family. Her words came out broken, like if she couldn't get them past her throat. Serafina's entire body was shaking, but she said everything was a lie. She assumed I fabricated everything because I was upset about being exposed. She said that I had computer skills and could have created any of these documents. She even alleged that I had hacked her social media accounts and fabricated proof. Nobody was buying it anymore, and she knew it. The papers on the table told a story that was too precise and consistent to be fabricated. 3 years of lies and larceny, chronicled in black and white, which no amount of tears or accusations could undo. Next, I dug out the credit card statements, which Serafina had hidden by seizing the mail before Mom could see it. As I placed the papers on the table between the water glasses and the bread basket, I heard a quiet sliding sound. Mom picked up the first statement and her eyes widened as she noticed charge after charge that she had never made. Her hand shook when she saw the $2,000 purse from Nordstrom last month. She continued reading down the list, discovering other purchases at stores she had never visited before. Dad took another statement and began putting the sums on his phone calculator. His face turned scarlet with each number he punched in. Serafina attempted to take the papers from Mom's hands, but Dorian grabbed her wrist and held it. The pastor cleared his throat and suggested, "Maybe we should all pray about this difficult situation." Dad interrupted him with a swift sweep of his hand. "Prayer won't fix fraud and theft," he stated as he dialed the bank's number. Serafina began to back up toward the dining room door as Dad spoke with someone about suspicious behavior on various accounts. Celeste abruptly stood up, her chair scraping across the floor. She informed everyone that Serafina had been rummaging through her phone for weeks. Serafina saw some Pride Month posts Celeste loved, and threatened to tell Mom she, too, was lesbian. Celeste's voice became more assertive as she described how Serafina requested money from her part-time work at the bookshop. Every week Serafina would deduct half of Celeste's income or show Mom the screenshots. Dorian slung his arm around Celeste's shoulders, and Serafina began denying everything. First, she said Celeste was lying. Then she said Celeste had offered her the money. Then she said it was a loan. Her story changed every few seconds, and everyone noticed. I went back into the folder to get the documents that would hurt the most. The marketplace screenshots appeared slowly, and I displayed them in front of Dad. When he saw Grandfather's purple heart posted as sold for $800, his breathing came to a stop. The next page revealed his whole watch collection sold for $20,000 in total. Dad sprang up so quickly that his chair toppled backward onto the floor. His fists clenched, and I feared he was going to hit Serafina. She must have thought so too since she dashed for the door. Dorian was already blocking her route, his arms folded. "You need to face what you've done," he told her. Serafina began yelling that we were all jealous of her success. She described herself as the lone good child in this ill household. The pastor and his wife stood up gently, gathering their belongings. The pastor stated that this was clearly a family situation that required legal assistance, not spiritual help. His wife refused to look at anyone as they headed towards the front door. I heard her mutter to him that they should not have gotten engaged in this mess. Dad's voice rose as he wanted Serafina's phone and laptop immediately. He needed to find out what more she had been keeping from her family. Serafina shook her head and attempted to run past Dorian towards the stairs. Mom's voice silenced her with a single word that rang across the room. "Enough." Serafina froze on the third step before gently turning around. Mom told her to sit down and discuss the $50,000 loan applications we discovered, which used their social security numbers without authorization. Serafina's face changed from red and angry to white and afraid. She understood we had accessed her email account and knew everything. Her legs appeared weak as she walked back to the dining room table. She sat down hard in her chair and stared at the evidence that was around. I told how Dorian's girlfriend at the registrar's office helped us discover the truth. Serafina had been removed 2 months earlier, not last week as she stated. She'd paid $500 to have another student take her anatomy exam for her. When the school discovered out, she was promptly booted out and given no chance to return. Serafina cashed all of our parents' subsequent tuition checks. She'd been retaining the money and claiming to attend classes that didn't exist. Mom began crying again, but this time her tears felt furious rather than sad. Dad was still on the phone with the bank, writing down case numbers. Serafina tried to influence everyone once more by falling on her knees. She sobbed about the strain to be the perfect daughter and how difficult it was. Nobody moved to comfort her, so her wailing became more urgent. Dad took out his phone again and dialed a different number. "Rowena Cade, please," he asked someone. "Tell her it's about a family emergency involving fraud." He placed the phone on speaker and set it on the table. Rowena's voice came over as clean and professional as Dad narrated what we had learned. She listened without interrupting until he finished describing the fraudulent checks and stolen funds. "You must file a police report immediately," Rowena said. "Tonight, if possible." She also instructed us to immediately lock all bank accounts and credit cards so Serafina could not drain them, which caused Serafina to leap up from her chair and knock over Mom's water glass. Serafina began pleading Mom not to call the cops, promising to repay everything somehow. But when Dad asked her how she intended to accomplish it without a job or a degree, She just kept saying she'd figure it out. Dorian cleared his throat and dropped another bombshell, telling everyone that he had already called the hospice where Grandma was staying that morning because he was concerned about Serafina attempting to obtain power of attorney. The administrator confirmed that someone matching Serafina's description came by yesterday to inquire about jewelry and estate paperwork, claiming to handle family business, but was turned away since she was not on the approved visiting list. Serafina's face turned pale to blazing crimson as she cried, "Dorian is lying." But he pulled up the email confirmation on his phone, which showed the administrator's response along with the security footage timestamp. Celeste abruptly rose up and walked over to Mom with her phone, displaying her screenshot after screenshot of texts Serafina had sent her for weeks. Mom's hands shook as she read Serafina's threats to expose Celeste to their youth group, email her links to conversion therapy camps, and threaten to make sure everyone at church knew Celeste was gay if she didn't pay Serafina money from her part-time job at the mall. Mom's eyes welled up with tears as she scrolled through message after message in which Serafina called Celeste nasty and threatened to destroy her life in the same way that she had mine. Serafina attempted to take the phone from Mom, but Dad stopped her. Serafina played her final desperate card by placing her palm on her stomach and claiming that she was pregnant and needed the money for her kid. Celeste actually laughed out loud and instantly called up Serafina's Instagram from the previous week, which showed everyone footage of Serafina doing shots at a downtown club, dancing on tables with a drink in each hand, and writing about being hungover the next morning. Serafina claimed the films were outdated, but Celeste displayed the date stamps from 5 days ago, as well as Serafina's Snapchat story from yesterday, in which she was drinking wine at brunch. Dad's phone started ringing, so he stepped aside to answer it. Coming back a few minutes later, his jaw was clenched tight. The bank had blocked all of their accounts after identifying abnormal behavior dating back 6 months, and the manager requested that they come in first thing tomorrow morning to check security camera footage of ATM withdrawals they did not recognize. Serafina jumped across the table, attempting to seize the evidence folder, knocking plates to the floor and splashing crimson wine onto Mom's white tablecloth. Dorian had to physically restrain her as she screamed that we were ruining her life, and she'd tell everyone at church that I'd converted Celeste and destroyed the family with my unhealthy lifestyle. I stood up and stared Serafina straight in the eyes, telling her that her threats no longer scared me since the truth about her crimes would be revealed regardless of the lies she propagated about my sexuality. She spit at me, but it hit the table instead. Mom finally snapped and told Serafina to leave the house immediately. Serafina demanded to know where she should go after we destroyed everything. And Dad informed her, in the coldest voice I'd ever heard, that she should have thought about it before stealing from her family. He allowed her only 1 hour to pack her necessary belongings before changing all the locks. If she took anything that wasn't hers, they'd include it in the police report. Serafina went upstairs, shouting and wailing, and slammed her door so violently that a picture fell off the corridor wall. Mom sank into her chair, questioning how they'd missed all of the warning flags and how their daughter could do this to them. I knelt down next to her and recounted how Serafina had been pitting everyone against one another for years, making us believe we were the problem while she was the victim, and using their trust and religious beliefs as weapons to conceal her crimes. Mom grabbed and grasped my hand. It was our first genuine contact since Serafina outed me, and I could feel her entire body shivering. Dorian was already on the phone with the police non-emergency line, gently outlining the fraud issue and inquiring about the documentation required for a formal report. Celeste had her laptop out and was compiling a spreadsheet of all the connections Serafina had harmed with her falsehoods over the years, including friends she'd turned against each other and family members who had stopped speaking because of the stories Serafina circulated. Dad was in his office, on the phone with credit card companies, his professional voice firm despite his trembling hands as he jotted down case numbers and dispute claim information. We could hear Serafina upstairs throwing things around and shouting on the phone to someone about how her nasty family was kicking her out for no reason. Rowena remained on speaker the entire time, guiding us through each move we needed to do to protect ourselves legally and financially from any more harm Serafina would attempt to create. 20 minutes later, Serafina stomped down the stairs pulling 2 massive suitcases behind her. Her face was red and puffy from sobbing, yet her eyes were wild and deadly. She placed the suitcases by the door and turned to face the rest of us. She claimed that if we called the police, she would commit suicide and it would be our fault. Rowena's voice came through the phone speaker right away, informing us that this was textbook manipulation. She advised us that if we suspected Serafina was suicidal, we should call 911 immediately. Serafina's cheeks turned even more red when she heard that. She began yelling that I had destroyed the entire family with my unhealthy lifestyle. She continued, God would punish me for being gay and turning Celeste against them as well. Her comments no longer hurt, because everyone knew who she truly was. She seized the door handle and yanked it open so fiercely that it smashed into the wall. A picture fell off the wall and landed on the floor. Dorian laughed at her high school graduation photo. She stormed out, dragging her baggage, and we heard her car pull out of the driveway. The next morning, Dad took us all to the police station to meet with Detective Celine Voss. She was a tall woman with gray hair who took our folder of evidence and began going through it page by page. She stated that Serafina's pattern of deceit could result in several criminal charges. She questioned us for 2 hours and took copies of everything we had. While we were there, Dad received a call from his accountant regarding an unusual item on his business credit report. 3 months ago, he booked a nice condominium in downtown with his work credit card. Serafina claimed to have been attending to this address for study groups all semester. The lease was in Dad's name, therefore he was liable for $12,000 in back rent. Detective Voss added this to her notes, claiming it demonstrated preparation and intent. We went straight from the police station to the bank, where Dad kept his business accounts. The manager led us to a back office and displayed surveillance footage on his computer. Serafina was at the ATM, hiding her face behind large sunglasses and a baseball cap. She repeatedly withdrew the daily maximum from Dad's company account. The manager assisted us in filing fraud reports for each transaction. He stated that having a police report will help them reverse the charges and possibly get some money back. We had hardly left the bank when Rowena called with very frightening news. Serafina sought for a $50,000 loan using our parents' details, which was approved yesterday. It would be posted to their account tomorrow morning, unless we halted it right now. Dad spent the next 3 hours on the phone with the loan firm, attempting to establish it was identity theft. He had to email them copies of the police report and sign many paperwork stating that he had never asked for a loan. They eventually agreed to cancel it, but stated that it would harm his credit score regardless. That evening, our phones began to fill up with Serafina's texts. She'd make extended apologies, stating she was sorry and simply wanted assistance. Then 5 minutes later, she'd send us a message threatening to ruin our life if we didn't drop the charges. She wrote on Facebook that our parents had kicked her out for attempting to save me from sin. She claimed they preferred their gay daughter over their straight daughter, who was simply trying to help. Most individuals who knew our family could tell something was wrong with her story, however. Celeste couldn't take the turmoil anymore and asked Dorian if she could stay with him for a few days. They spent the evening calling folks who had purchased Grandpa's items through Marketplace. Dorian stated that the items had been stolen and requested if they would consider returning them. When one old man who had purchased Grandpa's Purple Heart learned the truth, he became extremely outraged. He stated he bought it because Serafina had informed him the family needed money for medical expenditures. He offered to mail it back to us for free and even apologized for purchasing it. Mom spent the majority of the day in her room, crying and praying. She kept asking me whether she had failed as a mother and what she had done incorrectly with Serafina. I sat with her and assured her that Serafina made these decisions entirely on her own. Mom held my hand while she cried, which was the most touch we'd had in months. She couldn't comprehend how Serafina could lie so much about so many things. I informed her that Serafina had been doing this since we were kids, but she had gotten better at hiding it. Mom stated she felt terrible for not noticing it, but I assured her Serafina duped all of us. She questioned if I thought Serafina would truly hurt herself, and I replied that Serafina cared too much about herself for that. The next morning, Detective Voss called with more awful news for Serafina. They discovered credit card applications under Celeste's name that Serafina had submitted last week. The applications were rejected because Celeste was too young, but they demonstrated Serafina's desperation. Detective Voss stated that this was another criminal case for attempted identity theft of a juvenile. She asked Celeste if she would come in and make a statement about it. Dad's hands were shaking as he hung up the phone. Celeste came downstairs, pale, and asked if we could go to Rowena's office right away, as Serafina had arrived at her school that morning. She'd been waiting beside Celeste's car in the parking lot, and began following her to the main building. Celeste claimed Serafina repeatedly grabbed her arm and told her she needed to tell the cops she was confused about everything. The school security guard noticed Serafina become hostile, and had to forcibly remove her from Celeste. Rowena's assistant, Callum, arrived at the office within an hour and began filling out the restraining order papers while Celeste's hands shook. He stated that the school incident would strengthen our case because it had witnesses and security cameras. Celeste had to write down everything Serafina told her, even threats to destroy her college applications if she didn't help. Callum filed the emergency order that afternoon and informed us that it would be served to Serafina within 24 hours. 2 days later, Rowena called to inform us that Serafina had been sacked from her job at the mall. The manager had detected inventory issues and checked the security cameras during the previous 3 months. Serafina was discovered processing false returns and putting the cash in her pocket instead of the register. The management intended to file charges, adding another felony to Serafina's expanding record. Rowena stated that this strengthened our case because it demonstrated a pattern of theft from various sources. Dad spent the next morning at his accountant's office, reviewing every business transaction from the previous year. They discovered $28,000 in falsified checks and an additional $12,000 in fraudulent credit card payments. The accountant estimated that insurance would cover around half of the losses, leaving Dad to bear the remainder. Dad's face was gray when he arrived home, and he needed to take his blood pressure medication twice that day. That evening, the church elder called, and Dad put him on speaker so Mom could also hear. The elder stated that people were discussing our family status, which was generating division among the congregation. He advised that we take a break from all leadership posts until things calmed down. Dad simply said, "Okay," and hung up without arguing, indicating how weary he was. Mom began crying again and returned to her room without eating dinner. My phone vibrated with a message from someone I didn't recognize, who turned out to be Serafina's college acquaintance. She claimed Serafina had told everyone I planted all of the evidence because I was jealous of her success. The buddy stated that she stopped believing Serafina after seeing the police report that was uploaded online. She wanted me to know that Serafina was also lying about working at a legal firm, despite the fact that she had been unemployed for months. She emailed me screenshots of Serafina's communications, stating that our entire family was homophobic and that she needed to protect herself. I submitted everything to Rowena, who stated that it would help demonstrate Serafina's pattern of lying. The next afternoon we received an urgent call from the hospice where Grandma was residing. Someone attempted to enter her room after visiting hours, claiming to be her granddaughter with a family issue. The person matched Serafina's description and had attempted to persuade the night nurse that she needed to purchase jewelry for a funeral. Security turned her away, but not before she created a scene in the lobby. We had to impose additional security measures and provide a list of allowed guests. Dorian was so enraged that he smashed a hole in his apartment wall and needed to ice his knuckles. Mom finally met with me 3 days later, when Dad was in another meeting with lawyers. She explained that she had been thinking about everything and realized Serafina's betrayal was worse than anything else. She told me she needed time to comprehend my sexuality, but she could now see what true hurt looked like. She took my hand and told me Serafina had taught her the difference between disagreement and destruction. It wasn't complete acceptance, but it was the first time she'd freely touched me since finding out. She inquired if I'd always known, and I replied that I had since middle school. She nodded, saying she wished I had felt safe enough to tell her earlier. The following week, Detective Voss called to say they were bringing Serafina in for formal questioning. Serafina arrived at the station with a public defender who instructed her not to say anything. Detective Voss claimed Serafina's need for a lawyer immediately made her appear guilty to everyone. They had to release her but told her not to contact any family members. Serafina disobeyed the injunction within 2 hours, contacting Mom from a prohibited number. Mom hung up and immediately contacted Detective Voss to report it. Meanwhile, Dorian had gone through old emails and discovered something awful. Serafina has been uploading our information on questionable websites that sell personal information. She had listed all of our social security numbers, Mom's maiden name, and even our previous addresses. Dorian discovered at least 3 websites where she had sold our information for quick cash. We had to instantly freeze our credit and replace every password we'd ever used. In just 1 week, the credit monitoring service discovered 4 attempts to open new accounts in my name. Dorian's girlfriend assisted us in setting up identity theft protection, but warned us that the consequences could last for years. 2 weeks after the explosion, Dad received a call from an older guy who had purchased some of Grandpa's watches on Marketplace. The man explained that he had been thinking about it and wanted to do the right thing. He offered to sell them back to us for the same amount he paid Serafina. No profit. Dad met him in a coffee shop and returned with 6 of the 12 watches, including Grandpa's favorite from the war. Dad cried while clutching that watch, saying it felt like he was getting a piece of his father back. The man apologized for purchasing them, saying he should have recognized something was wrong because Serafina appeared so desperate. Dad praised him and stated that not everyone would have been as honest about returning them. Celeste arrived at my flat 3 days later, carrying an envelope she discovered in her backpack after school. Her hands shook as she handed it to me, and I immediately recognized Serafina's handwriting, which featured Bible lines on family loyalty and forgiveness on both sides of the paper. Celeste had already contacted Detective Voss, who arrived within an hour to retrieve the letter as evidence that Serafina had violated the restraining order. The detective photographed everything and informed Serafina that if she contacted any of us again, she would face jail time. She stated that the prosecution will add this to the charges, reducing Serafina's chances of avoiding prison. Celeste stayed with me that night because she was afraid Serafina might show up to Mom and Dad's house, even though the restraining order protected all of us. The next morning, I finally scheduled an appointment with the therapist my doctor had recommended weeks earlier. I sat in her office, attempting to explain all that had happened, and she listened without judgment as I described being outed and witnessing my family burst. She helped me realize that Serafina's use of my sexuality as a weapon revealed nothing about who I was as a person. She taught me breathing exercises for when my anger became too much, and she helped me understand that Serafina's nastiness stemmed from her own issues, not anything I had done wrong. We planned weekly meetings, and she stated that healing will take time, but I had already demonstrated amazing bravery by standing up for the truth. 2 days later, while I was at work, Rowena called with news from the bank. They had evaluated all of the fraud complaints we had made and agreed to reverse almost 60% of the charges because we had reported everything so promptly. Dad would recover $24,000 of the $40,000 Serafina had stolen, but the remainder was deemed too old to challenge. Rowena said it was better than other fraud cases she'd handled, and we'd at least gotten something back, even if the emotional toll would last much longer. Mom contacted me that afternoon to tell me that she and Dad had begun visiting a marriage counselor to deal with what Serafina had put them through. The counselor was assisting them in understanding how Serafina had perverted their religious beliefs in order to conceal her crimes and manipulate them against one another. Mom stated that the counselor pointed out how Serafina had used their faith as a shield whenever she got into problems. Dad was beginning to forgive himself for not recognizing the warning signs sooner, and Mom was processing her sorrow over raising someone capable of such brutality. They went twice a week, and Mom said it was the first time in months that they had actually chatted rather than arguing about who was to blame for everything. Rowena called back a week later, this time sounding irritated. Serafina's public defender had approached her about a possible plea deal, in which Serafina would admit to fraud and identity theft in exchange for probation and repayment. The attorney stated that Serafina would submit to therapy and separation from her family, but she wanted to avoid jail time due to mental health issues that allegedly caused all of this. Rowena stated that we had to decide as a family whether to accept the offer or seek for prison time, which could result in a lengthy trial. Dorian wanted her in jail, but Mom was concerned about Serafina's future with a felony record. Dad stated he just wanted to get this over with so we could go on. Celeste claimed she'd feel better knowing Serafina couldn't reach us for years. After 3 family meetings and dozens of phone calls, we agreed to the plea agreement, but only under tight terms. Serafina was required to make full compensation, even if it took decades, and attend forced therapy for at least 2 years. She couldn't contact any family members for 5 years and had to complete 300 hours of community service. Rowena emphasized that any infraction will result in instant jail time and no second chances. The plea hearing took place 2 weeks later, at the downtown courthouse. Serafina arrived in a conservative suit, attempting to appear sorry, but the ruse fell apart the moment she opened her mouth. She told the judge that we were punishing her because she was the only moral member in our family, and that it was all a misunderstanding. The judge saw right through her and stated that he had rarely seen somebody display less regret for destroying their family. He agreed to the plea offer but added 500 hours of community service and obligatory financial management training. Serafina's counsel attempted to disagree, but the judge stated that she was fortunate to avoid prison and should be grateful for her family's kindness. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. She had been reading books about LGBTQ people and spirituality that the marriage counselor had suggested, and she wanted me to know she was trying to understand. She said she still had questions and troubles, but I was her daughter, and that would never change. She said that witnessing Serafina's hatred taught her what truly harmed a family, and it wasn't who someone loved. It was the first time she'd reached out with anything other than disappointment or Bible passages since the beginning. Reading her reply made me cry, and I wrote her back that I loved her as well. The following week, Celeste requested if I'd accompany her to our parents to discuss something important. We sat in the living room where the horrific supper had occurred, and Celeste took a big breath before revealing that she, too, was lesbian. Mom's face went through roughly 10 distinct emotions, but Dad simply nodded slowly, as he had suspected for a while. Celeste held my hand and told that she had known for years but had been too afraid to say anything after seeing how they had responded to me. Mom began crying, but not the angry tears she had previously shed, but rather the sad tears of not providing a safe environment for her girls. Dad explained that Serafina's betrayal had taught them that honesty was worth respecting even if it contradicted their views. They pledged to try to comprehend and urged Celeste to be patient as they learned. Mom hugged both of us, and stated she would rather have honest daughters than another Serafina. 3 weeks following the plea hearing, Dorian asked everyone to supper at his apartment to commemorate his girlfriend's advancement at work. She'd been so helpful with Serafina that she seemed like family, and Dorian wanted to make it official. We all brought food, and for the first time in months it seemed like a proper family supper, free of resentment and accusations. Dorian raised his glass to toast the truth, even when it hurt, and the familial links that had withstood Serafina's attempts to break them. His girlfriend thanked us for accepting her and stated she had never seen a family battle so hard to be together through such adversity. We remained up late talking and laughing, and Mom even inquired about my girlfriend's job without passing judgment. Celeste brought her girlfriend, and nobody made her feel strange or uncomfortable. Dad expressed his pride in his children for being honest, even when it was scary. 3 months passed before the first check from Serafina arrived in Dad's mailbox. It was only $200 of the $40,000 she owed, but Dad looked at it for a long time. He drove to the downtown antique dealer who had one of Grandfather's watches and paid $800 to get it back. The dealer recalls purchasing it from a young woman who claimed her grandfather had died and the family needed money. Dad put the watch in his safe, alongside the others we'd been finding. With finals and everything else happening school, my graduation day arrived earlier than intended. Celeste wore a little rainbow pin on her dress collar. Mom noticed it but didn't say anything, just squeezed both of our hands as we went across campus together. She kept snapping pictures and informing other parents about her honest daughters, who made her proud. We went to lunch after, and no one mentioned Serafina's empty chair at the table. Detective Voss contacted me 2 weeks later, while I was packing my dorm room. Serafina had been detained in Nevada for attempting to open credit cards with fraudulent documentation at 3 different institutions. The detective stated she will face federal prosecution since she crossed state boundaries to commit fraud. She'd been using a fictitious name and dyed her hair black, but they nabbed her nevertheless. Mom and Dad decided to reaffirm their vows on their 25th anniversary, 6 months after everything had occurred. They kept it small at the courthouse, just the kids and Dorian's girlfriend. The judge read something about truth and trust as the foundations of marriage. Mom wore her original wedding dress, which still fit, and Dad grieved during the ceremony. They went to supper afterward, and Dad made a toast on discovering what truly counts in a family. Celeste received her acceptance letter to State University the following spring, along with a full scholarship for her essay about discovering bravery. She'd written about seeing her sister devastate their family with lies while learning to be herself. The scholarship committee described it as the most moving essay they had read that year. She moved into the dorms that fall and displayed pride flags in her window. Dorian had been planning his proposal for months and eventually pulled it off at our 4th of July backyard barbecue. He dropped down on one knee and informed his lover that she had demonstrated true loyalty. She answered yes right away, and everyone rejoiced as Dad prepared burgers and Mom shed happy tears. They arranged the wedding date for next summer and invited me to join the wedding party. 8 months after her incarceration, Serafina's lawyer sent a hefty package with her prisoner number on the return address. I opened it and found 10 pages of her blaming me for ruining her life and future. She called me names and accused me of turning the family against her because of my LGBT agenda. I read the first paragraph and then threw it away without looking at the remainder. 2 years after that dreadful Sunday supper, we all gathered at Mom and Dad's place for Thanksgiving. Without Serafina, the table was smaller, but it felt larger since everyone was being honest with one another. Nobody acted strangely when Celeste brought her girlfriend. Dorian's wife was pregnant and showed everyone ultrasound photos. Mom prepared the same foods she always did, but this time, we truly loved eating them. Dad said Serafina, thanking God for the truth and family members who chose honesty over dishonesty. We stayed up late playing board games and telling stories, with no one hiding secrets or scheming manipulations. The house felt quiet in a way it never did when Serafina was lying about everything. We weren't perfect, and Mom battled at times with having 2 queer daughters, but we were trying. That was more than we had ever had when Serafina poisoned everything with her lies and plots.